controversial, confrontational, compassionate.
Oh my God!
These are just some of the things that have made Fair Go New Zealand's #1 consumer watchdog.
Oh, there is no need for that.
Tonight, we look back on the laughs and the tears. The moments that made Fair Go a hit for 40 years.
You can turn that off.
One thing I'll say for your program, you help get things done.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Lately, we've been thinking of the 1970s, which is why we've come to this place.
How many hours of footage do you reckon I have in here?
Well, I reckon they must have a lot.
This is the New Zealand Film and Television Archive.
This is very good stuff. Am I 86 or
You're
99?
86, I'm 99.
Hey,
It feels about right, doesn't it?
I mean,
Well, she was the brains in the operation, wasn't she?
I'm going to report you to HR on my shoe phone.
Carefully stored away
It's massive.
somewhere
This
in
way.
this highly restricted vault.
I think we're that way.
I think it's this way.
No, it's definitely this way.
I'm going this way.
All right.
Is Fair Go's entire 40-year history.
What are we looking for? F. Here you go.
F's down here.
Oh, maybe it is that way. Okay. That's why you're the brains of the operation.
Our show started in 1977. Hato was only 2 years old.
Drove it home.
Yeah, I think that's the same. This is my sock drawer. There you go.
Oh, yeah, Fair Go. Here we go. Yes.
Right between eyewitness
There you go.
news and dig this.
I'd only just been born.
This
The
looks
very-
like #1.
So this is it, the very first episode of Fair Go.
Apparently.
I feel like I should have gloves on. That can't be it. It's got to be more than that, surely.
In 1977, Fair Go was transformed from a Kiwi colloquialism to must-see TV.
40 years of television history. Makes a man feel young.
It's the second longest running show on NZ TV,
I've been on the show about 5 minutes.
which is why we've called an old warhorse out of retirement.
This is fearless Fair Go reporter Kevin Milne.
I feel like this is a bit surreal for me. I feel like kind of junior Fair Go, or master Fair Go, or the boy at Fair Go.
Yeah, that's right. You're almost the grandchild, Fair Go, Mr. Fair Go. I always think of Brian Edwards as Mr. Fair Go.
Brian Edwards was the man who kicked it off in '77.
Good evening and welcome to the final Fair Go for 1977. Over the past year, we've unearthed some major...
And in case you're wondering why there's no copy of that very first show,
In the old days, it was all tape. It was always taped. The tapes were great big thick things. You know, they were worth a lot of money, and you couldn't just kind of store them. You had to wipe them and reuse them, and sadly, that's what happened.
from the very beginning, Fair Go did things
Well, good
differently.
evening and welcome.
Well, normally we do name the people who appear on Fair Go, but, well, as for the terminally stupid, we'll give this chap a break just this once.
Because we were naming names, the impact was amazing. Once Fair Go went to air, it just became an instant hit. People loved it. It was like a real brawl. You knew that there was a hell of a lot at stake.
It was
The
rusty.
name and shame game. It didn't go down well with big business.
They come out in crates like this.
But viewers loved seeing the boot on the other foot.
I remember there was a story about a firm called Clutch Services that Brian was interviewing. And the guy honestly looks like he could just step out of his seat and clout Brian at any point. It was fantastic, but scary.
Kevin Milne, very much a man of the '70s, would have to wait 6 more years to join the Fair Go team.
It's only a matter of the insurance company writing the cheque.
I loved bringing up companies that had stuffed people around and to make their morning a shocker. I just adored that. Because these people have been giving other people trouble for so long. It was time they got a bit of their own back.
Must have made you feel good, like you feel like you're on the right side.
Oh, absolutely. Loved it.
It's a view shared by many of his contemporaries.
Well, we love doing it, and so we showed that we love doing it. It was the only kind of television that I could have imagined myself working in.
It's got heart, it's got integrity, it's got authenticity, it's got, you know, longevity, it's got nous, and it's got sassy.
I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say it was more iconic than the news. You know, because everyone knew someone who'd been helped by Fair Go, who'd been done by Fair Go, who was in the process of writing to Fair Go. it was a huge deal.
Fair Go's always gone into battle for the little guy.
Them to treat me like that, and of course I got my Irish up, and I thought, well, fair go.
And from time to time, things didn't quite go to plan.
Was there something about a lion on a house?
Yes. I did some silly things and made mistakes in different sorts of ways. Being television, you've always got to kind of illustrate these things. So I painted a line right up the side of the house, across the roof and down the other side.
And then problems really come into it because it gets to the house and shaves about 0.6 of a metre off the side of the house. Now this is the hill's boundary line.
And I've been assured by the painting people that it was like kindergarten finger paint. We just hose it off at the end. And no, the sun came out, we had lunch, the sun came out and we baked the lion on their house. So when I left that day, I remember saying goodbye to them and not only, you know, did they have this problem with the boundary line, but they now had a sort of fluorescent pink line straight across their house that we couldn't get off.
That wasn't the only boo-boo.
Well, now you've guessed it. These two.
Getting studio volunteers to count out the number of hokey-pokey nuggets in a bottle of ice cream also backfired badly.
How are you getting on? You found any?
Yeah, not many, yeah.
Oh, there's quite a bit here.
Yeah.
I remember this as a boy. I was a boy in Gore watching this. We
yes.
talked about for ages.
Well, unfortunately, a couple of quite elderly women volunteered to do it, and I thought, well, who am I to say you're too old to do this?
Is there any here?
So I gave them they you know, each had a litre of it. And right there, you know, elderly people take everything quite seriously. They're very dutiful.
Well, this is a big job.
But we got a call about 3 days after that show from a GP saying, nothing too dramatic, lads, but I think that you ought to know that two of my elderly patients have got frostbite. And I imagine they're probably the only people that have ever got frostbite in the world from putting their hands too long in ice cream.
Fair Go has always been a huge hit with the audience, but Milne reckons the early stories weren't necessarily the best.
If you have a look at the first program, or the earliest programs still around, you'll notice that the stories are not particularly strong, and to say the least. There was a guy called Spencer Jolly, who was probably the best investigative journalist in New Zealand television, and he decided to work for Fair Go. And on this program, you'll see that he's dealing with a complaint from a young boy who didn't get any lollies in a lolly scramble. And there was no vision of it. So there was no... It was a terrible story.
About 80 of us entered, and when the lollies were ready to be thrown, only one was thrown, some lolly scramble.
All scramble and no lolly, eh?
But jolly good for the teeth.
And many years later, people used to say to me, and they probably say to you guys still, oh, gosh, I wish we could still get those great old stories in the old days, you know, back in Brian Edwards' days and all that sort of stuff. And actually, if you go back and look at it, no, not altogether all that strong. But it wasn't until Philip Alpers comes along in the early 80s and started turning Fair Go into a very powerful investigative current affairs show dealing with consumer information.
After the break, the fight for consumer rights takes to the streets.
My name's Philip Alpers from Television New Zealand, from the Fair Go program. Wonder if I could ask you a question or two?
Now, live from the Avalon NFU studios.
Over the course of 40 years, Fair Go has gone through a constant evolution. But it has always been focused on helping the little guy.
Brian Edwards used to say, this is a story about sorting out people who are hurt. It's not about people breaking law or breaking some regulation or anything like that. We don't care about any of that. We're not policemen, you know. We're human beings, basically, helping out.
Well, how do you feel about that?
Oh, marvellous.
You're quite happy about that?
Yes, definitely.
Right.
Over the years, there's been plenty of big names all too willing to join the fight for consumer rights. But it's Alpers who's credited with giving the show teeth.
We owe a lot to Brian Edwards, but we owe a lot to Philip Alpers too.
Good evening to you and welcome to another edition of Fair Go.
He used to wear white suits and fedoras and Panamas and all that sort of thing. He had this kind of theatrical, he had a bald head, he looked like Shakespeare. And so it was easy to not take him terribly seriously.
How can Philip wear such gaudy ties without blushing?
Friend, you ain't seen nothing yet. This is what I wear every other day of the week. All right? Gaudy indeed.
But he did some of the best current affairs stories Fairgo's ever done. He turned it from being an entertainment show into an extraordinarily powerful investigative show.
Welcome back.
It was the only kind of journalism that I can imagine myself doing. Journalism in which I was committed to what I was doing, telling a story on behalf of somebody else and trying to make a difference.
Fairgo approached Alan Travis as he left Auckland Airport.
Alper's always got his man.
Mr. Travis?
My name's Philip Alpers from Television New Zealand, from the Fairgo program. Wonder if I could ask you a question or two? But the funny thing about that was he was sort of trying to take a swing at me. But then after the interview, because these people have, you know, really good social skills, after the cameraman had shut up, I started talking to him, and he smiled and he said, "You're really good at this. You put yourself in exactly the position where I had to hit my wife before I hit you."
I believe you're taking anything up to $90,000 in cash with you. Is that the money?
And I wasn't conscious of it at all. As I say, I didn't like that kind of confrontation, but it did make wonderful television.
Well, that's all I've got to say to you before I lay it out.
He was also responsible for one of the biggest payouts in Fairgo history.
It all began with this car.
The Toyota Russ story was the greatest of them all.
In those years, 1980 and 81, Toyota built nearly 18,000 Corollas and Starlets. Total value on the street, in round figures, $177 million. Toyota, that's incredible.
It produced more money out of a story than any other story that's ever done. It produced millions for New Zealanders who were complaining about their cars having rust. It was a massive story.
This is the Toyota assembly plant in Thames.
I had started hearing stories from panel beaters about this rust problem with Toyota cars, and it was endemic. It was through a whole model. And it got more and more exciting, and I got into the research, and I dug right down, and I spoke to all of these people who shouldn't have been speaking to me at all. And eventually I thought, I've got it. And I said to everybody, I've got it, I've got it. And then I walked out into the car park, and my car was one of them.
Big payouts, big personalities meant Fairgo would regularly draw million-plus audiences, roughly a third of New Zealand's entire population.
We couldn't believe that it was #1 all the time. I mean, here we were just having fun and doing the type of advocacy journalism that we really believed in, that would have got us sacked if we were in the newsroom. And yet it was just so, well, rewarding's the only word I keep coming up with. It was tremendously rewarding to be on that show.
Of course, life could be tough for those on the wrong end of the camera.
One thing I'll say for your program, you help get things done, and I'll certainly won't procrastinate anymore on this one.
Tim Shadbolt was arguably Fairgo's most famous bad guy.
Yeah, well, I did. I reckon I'm a real upfront, honest Kiwi that's just made a few mistakes in my life, like every other New Zealander, and I reckon 3 programs just on Tim Shadbolt was a little bit over the top.
Putting the boot into a Kiwi icon wasn't easy.
I'm a huge admirer, or was a huge admirer of Tim Shadbolt. I still am, actually, for the work that he now does down in Invercargill and all that sort of thing. But he was an amazing guy in the 60s, and we all thought he was a great hero of ours. But he let a lot of people down when he was in the concreting business. And I think he thought that he could just sort of entertain his way out. And as much as we all liked to think that Shadbolt was this wonderful guy and it was great to have him on our show and all that sort of thing, we wanted a result, and he didn't give results. He just didn't. I don't know why he wouldn't. So we put the boot in.
Shadbolt declined our offer of a right of reply.
But the money was hers, Tim.
Yes, but didn't she come out a winner? For $600, she got a $3,000 drive, she got all the money back, plus interest.
I think it's really great that we didn't give him any leniency. You know, we treated him like everybody else. I think it's really good that we did that.
Mr. Walsh, I work for a Fairgo program, TV New Zealand.
As any Fair Go reporter will tell you, it's usually arrogance, stubbornness and bad decisions that land people on Fair Go.
Are you going to give her the money back?
The funny thing about it, actually, is that the number of con artists on Fair Go is much smaller than you might imagine. Most of the rip-offs, the big dough, is from white-collar companies refusing to accept their responsibilities. It's not shoddy tradies. The big dough is the banks and the insurers and all this sort of stuff.
American Home Assurance have actually given me this cheque to give you. There's $250,000 from them.
Getting insurance payouts for ordinary Kiwis like Maria to few became Milne's speciality.
It was my favourite story. It had so much going for it, but it had a delightful woman who had sadly lost her husband in a crash just after she had taken out some life insurance. But the agent had not passed the papers on to Norwich Life, and therefore Norwich Life said, well, you know, we didn't have the file, so how could we have accepted the policy?
We have given considerable consideration to the events that have occurred. Norwich Life is prepared to make full payment to you of $100,000 as an ex gratia payment.
Oh my God! This magic TV moment came courtesy of Norwich Life's CEO.
They're not just words, Maria. I have a cheque here for $100,000.
Oh my God, I don't believe it.
From Norwich.
And a fantastic side story to this is that the chief executive couldn't be there on the night. We pre-recorded his message when he gave over the money, and he had to go to Fiji. But his board had told him, when you come back to your office, if this hasn't worked properly for us, as far as we're concerned, there will be an envelope on your desk. That means you're fired. If there's no envelope, take your seat and continue working.
Wow.
And when he got back, he had done such a brilliant job that in fact they did keep him on.
Getting a resolution was a big part of Fair Go's DNA.
Your reaction?
It's just wonderful.
But so too was getting a laugh.
I think there are two big things about Fair Go. One was confrontation, the other one was humour.
With a TV star like Philip Alphys, it's terribly important to know what shampoo and conditioner to use. Philip's hair's just oozing fun, but like everyone's, it does have its little points. So for Philip, I use this heavenly turtle oil shampoo and conditioner. A mid-long pouch and secret fractionated formula fondles the follicles. Penetrating protein from the tummy of the turtle titillates the tired Towson. A special formulation to give Philip's hair extra body and Philip's body extra hair. You'll be surprised at the results. Turtle oil, shampoo and conditioner. I love it. And so do I. Ever seen a turtle with flyaway hair? It can work for you too.
After the break, the lighter side of Fair Go. That's up next.
Hello? Mr. Harrison?
Holding people to account made for good telly.
You remember that $2,000 you took off me?
Oh, no, hey, cut it out.
But it was the light and shade that really got people talking.
The perfect program was one that had a really powerful, solid story at the top, and then just a really good laugh at the end of the show.
Taking complaint from a guy who brought some nuns off Mr. Pope.
I advertised in the Herald for 4 nuns, and I got a phone call in the afternoon saying, this is Mr. Pope speaking.
And I thought, this guy's mad.
He couldn't get them to breed.
I said, I only want young nuns.
Suddenly, you've got comedy gold.
Ethel, how do you feel about all this?
Oh, well, if it's going to make Beck happy, I'll go along with it.
I knew, of course, that nuns were a breed of pigeon, but the key thing was to do a story with him where the build-up was him just talking about nuns.
Well, there's no point in having 4 hens to breed from.
No, you can't breed from 4 hens, can you?
No, I don't think so.
He was smart enough to know what I was getting at, and so he just kept referring to all these lovely questions in a dead straight face. It worked at an absolute treat.
Back then, Milne was the mere apprentice to the master of making them laugh.
I love entertaining. I'd rather do an entertaining story than a serious, gritty one. And I really wanted to be one of those crusading current affairs journalists in my mind, but then when it came to actually doing it, that really isn't where my strengths were.
This girl as fresh as a flower, just caught in a shower, past me cool as a breeze. I had to give her a squeeze.
Kerry was the first to take a TV ad and give it her own spin. The Cool Charm.
Oh, yes.
Ad.
At the Papakura military camp, where I had to spray myself with Cool Charm and parade past soldiers. In the ad, the soldiers break ranks and go running after the very attractive woman. In this one, I was basically clawing at them, desperate for them to look at me, and wouldn't have a bar of me. So, and it finished with me doing like the Benny Hill chase, chasing the soldiers as they fled from me and my Cool Charm.
Of course, it was viewer complaints and real life that often generated the best laughs.
3? Huh, no problem. Oh, it's a long way down. Atta girl, Alpha.
The cat door that was installed.
The cat door that was installed at the top of the door instead of the bottom. And we had Rosalie Nelson, who was the most exquisite redhead and just a beautiful young woman, brilliant journalist, great communicator. And she got her 2 Burmese cats to be our cat stunt cats to try and get up into the cat door. And that we had them on mini trampolines, we had rope ladders. But that really was, I think, the credit for that one goes to Rosalie's cats and Sarah Stretton, who was the director on that. She was brilliant.
For someone who spent just a few years on the show, she left a legacy of laughs.
I remember my first day at Avalon, but I don't remember my first day on Fair Go. I think probably because I was so terrified. You know, it was live television, and I was working with some enormously influential journalists, and I really didn't have the nous or the experience to be there, I thought. And in fact, quite a few other people thought that too, I think.
That winning combination of comedy, controversy and confrontation turned Fair Go into a formidable brand.
So I think in a way the first 20 were the great years for Fair Go. I don't think you could say that the best stories emerged out of the first 20. It was just the bigger hoo-ha.
Next week.
We started seeing some extraordinary brawls going on.
Threats and backlash.
I'm crane you with that.
There was a famous case of a guy who rang us up one Saturday morning and said he was going to blow up the house.
Look! There is no need for this.
There were a lot of big disputes and fights and back gardens and all that sort of stuff.
You've got to let him get up and turn the camera off. Look, come on.
That's next week.